So we'll maybe give another 30 seconds to see if anybody else is going to wander in, because we're all late for everything these days. I blame it. Andy here's from Microsoft. I blame it on the Microsoft calendaring system, which makes it very, very easy to fill your calendar up completely and then overfill it. And these networking breaks, these sessions are short, and the networking breaks, people want to get as much in as possible. So I've talked enough, and I think we've got all the stragglers in. So welcome. This panel is called The Reality of Agents. And as has been noted several times throughout this conference, agent is the new AI, agentic is the new AI, whatever you want to say. So if you want to write a business plan and raise a couple of $1 billion, just put agents in your business plan. Going to work, no problem. What could go wrong? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I've got three great panelists here from State Street and from Microsoft. So we have two lofty institutions with a lot of experience. And we have Camille, who has a PhD in machine learning. I'm glad to have her here, a very young person, relative to me at least, and who can give us a perspective of a fresh person, and also involved from the investment side. So I think we'll have really interesting perspectives here. And I like the fact that we've got this kind of diversity. So we're going to give a couple of minutes to let people introduce themselves more thoroughly, and then we'll have a couple of questions that I want to ask them, and we'll save some time, a few minutes at the end, for you folks to ask questions. So think about the questions that are on your mind. But what we're trying to do here is get to where things really are a little bit more on the ground. We've heard a lot of that today, and we're going to start talking about it around what agents are in general, because, again, that's sort of the first order issue right now is what is it we're talking about. But before we go there, let the panelists introduce themselves. So Barbara, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Barbara. I've been I've got 15 years of experience in financial services. I started off my career in investment banking, then moved into State Street about 10 years ago, where I had a variety of different roles, all with the mindset of technology-driven, automating processes, had roles within alpha data management, then blockchain, digital assets tokenization, then moved into AI, Agentic AI, and now I'm looking into quantum computing and use cases for State Street.
Great. Camille?
Hi, everyone. My name is Camille Little. As Tom mentioned, I just finished up my PhD in the Department of Electrical Engineering at Rice University studying AI. My focus was AI ethics, so I worked on developing methods and frameworks that could wrap around existing systems and help make them more reliable, robust, fair, interpretable. And just a few weeks ago, I started full-time with Non Sibi Ventures. We are an early-stage seed and Series A firm investing in industrial technology, AI, and climate tech. So nice to meet you all.
Great.
And my name is Andy Roberts. I'm a solution engineer at the Microsoft Innovation Hub, which is we're a worldwide organization. We have about 45 hubs across the globe where we work with our mainly enterprise customers to anywhere from business envisioning, kind of understanding how they want to transform as an organization through solution envisioning, design sessions, and building prototypes that they can take home and iterate on to get into production. So I've been at Microsoft about 27 years, focused in some way, shape, or form in different roles, but always around data and machine learning and AI.
Great. Pleasure to have you all here, and I think it'll be an exciting discussion. So we started talking amongst ourselves as the panelists, as panels tend to do a little bit before they get on the stage here, and there was a lot of feeling amongst us all that while everybody talks about agents, the reality of agents right now, I'll make a little joke that we used to make. I helped found the data science organization at Booz Allen Hamilton, a large organization, about 15 years ago. And now it has 5 or 10,000 people in it. But at the time, we used to say, they'd say, how many people are there? And we'd say, oh, there's 500 or 600. And they said, how many people really know it and are available? And we say, well, there's 3 people and a goat. And the goat is busy. And so that's sort of my joke about where we are to a certain extent with agentic AI, is there is a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of discussion. There are 3 people and a goat maybe out there doing some things, but it's pretty early days. And so we wanted to start And the other thing is, it's not really well defined. It's more of a spectrum. So some people, you could, I think one of us said something like, if your thermostat turns on or off, is that an agent? If you can set up a schedule on your programmable thermostat, is that an agent? Well, it's a kind of very simple agent, but it's not generally what people think of when they talk about agentic AI. So we wanted to start the discussion a little bit with, well, what's the spectrum and where are you seeing agentic AI from your perspective? So Barbara, let me ask you that question and talk a little bit about what State Street is doing in this area and where the reality is and how you think about agentic AI.
Sure. I think we are, I would say, like in the early processes of deploying or looking into agents. So we started off like, giving access to Copilot so that, people can play around with Copilot, like with agents, getting a feel for it, like, how prompting works. And I think that's like, a very good technique to learn that. And also, I think like from what I've noticing, like, when speaking to, people within my organization is like, what is the full capability of AI and Copilot, right? So really, really understanding like, what is it good for, what is it not good for, how to use it effectively. Like, it involves a lot of training, learning, upskilling and reskilling. From an agentic AI perspective, I think we're just really scratching the surface of that, really understanding like, so what are the best use cases for that? And then really also with the mindset, because we are very heavily regulated, like, from a governance and from a risk perspective, like what does need to be in place for that, and this is like where I think we had a discussion around it, and I think it was mentioned yesterday as well, when we talk about like shadow IT or end user developed tools. So for example, if now businesses can, deploy and develop their own tools, like, what do they need to be aware of? Like, do they need to be registered? Like, how can we keep, how can we know, like, what is out there and what people are building? So, like, we need to have a good, like, in inventory of that, like, in place. And then from a governance perspective as well. So every single use cases that we, looking to deploy needs to go through, like, a governance, like, committee, like, they will assess the use cases. They will look at what LLM you're using, what data you're using. So it's also really important to think about that, like, what data will you be using, like, or will the agent have access to, managing also, like, should you have access to these data points, right? So there's a lot of like governance involved, there's a lot of risk involved, so a lot of like stakeholders come together and like, figuring out like, the right framework before we actually going in full deployment mode.
And how, Barbara, does State Street think about, or do you think about the delineation between using Copilot for Microsoft Word or something and an agentic AI thing?
I think like what I'm seeing from a Copilot perspective is more from like a personal, like, efficiency perspective, like summarizing meeting notes, like, rephrasing meetings or emails, and then like, kind of like more, how can I make my existing processes more efficient? But from an agent perspective, it just really is looking like, at the whole process, like, in much more detail and automating like, a bigger workflow. And that's the question, like, what would that entail? And what would like, the role be, like my role, for example, be, or somebody else's role in that? Like what would that role be? Like, will it be like, oversight? Will it be, whatever it is, like, still kind of like figuring that part out, I would say. But it's just more like with an agentic AI mindset, it's just like, I think it's like bigger scale, looking at like, more complex use cases and see how we can automate that. Where, for example, from a Copilot perspective, it's more about, personal, like, efficiency gains, like, how can I be more productive, like, with my day-to-day task.
Okay. So Andy, Microsoft is clearly one of the hyperscalers, as we now call them. We have many different names for them over the decades.
Microsoft has been called many names. So
yes. but they're now clearly among the most vaunted technology organizations in the world. I think they are one of the big three hyperscalers, clearly. And everything that we've heard here at the conference and everything you read in the newspapers is, well, if you want to see who's using this stuff most aggressively and most at the leading edge, it's the technology companies. So give us your perspective on this in terms of how do you think about agentic AI and what it really is, and what, in your experience with the customers you work with in Microsoft, are you doing there today?
So, when I look at that delineation between, first of all, AI and agentic AI, or agentic AI and traditional process automation, I think there was a good example given today by Monica from Liberty Mutual on the panel just a little bit ago, right? And she talked about Libby, right? And so Libby, at the outset, you think, well, that's just a bot. I'm asking some questions, I'm getting a response, right? That's more of a traditional, hey, I've got it, maybe it's a generative response, so it's got AI behind the scenes. But then she started talking about some of the tools that it had access to. So it said, hey, this bot has access to the system that we use to look at the number of devices users have, right? And so that was a tool in the toolbox. And so when I think about agentic AI, I think about automating a process, that may have multiple steps. Some of those steps may involve generative AI. So whether it's the response or somewhere in the middle, sometimes it's reformatting as I'm stitching things together. Not all of the steps actually require generative AI. And then there's a reasoning capability. So usually I'm using a large language model to determine what are the steps that I'm going to use to solve the problem, and then actually execute those steps. Another example that's kind of at the forefront right now, because we just announced yesterday, is we just added agentic mode to for the frontier mode for Copilot for Word and Excel in the online version. So it's very scoped at the moment. But the difference really becomes, hey, I've got this quick task that I want you to do. Write this summary or summarize this document to more complex workflows that Word and Excel will be able to do, to reformat, to restyle, to retheme, to even move things around, to understand what errors might be in your spreadsheet. Hey, you're looking to calculate MPV, but that's not how you do it. That's hopefully if you're calculating MPV, you're someone that knows how to do it, but or this table looks ill-formatted, right? And really interact. So the other part of that is there are different events that would trigger an agentic workflow, right? So it's not just a chat communication. It might be looking for other signals, an event that happens within Excel, a document landing on a website or inside of a file repository, et cetera.
Great. That's great. And yes, I saw, in fact, the announcement today. If you haven't seen it and you're a Microsoft shop, you should definitely read it, because they made a big announcement today about an upgrade to their Microsoft 365 products and this agentic capability. So Camille, you're on the investment side.
Yes.
And a startup seed investment side. So you're probably on what we used to call the bleeding edge, maybe, trying to really get at these early companies. So what's your attitude about agentic AI at your firm, and what do you see these firms working on that we should be paying attention to?
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, we are, of course, getting swamped with agentic deals. Literally on the daily, we see hundreds of them on a weekly basis. I think, as investors, we're, of course, always trying to think of differentiation. I think Paul said it earlier today that, there are 30 vendors and all 30 of them are talking about, we have agents, we do, agentic AI. So I think, we're trying to focus on companies that kind of have some sort of moat, whether that's within data or a very specific process. And so one example that I can think of, so I think someone in the pharmaceutical industry spoke earlier today. So there's several, pharma companies have several different sites, oftentimes across, all over the world, really. And a lot of times these sites don't speak to one another. And so we're looking at companies that can, understand this data, handle this data, help the sites speak to one another. So we're kind of looking for solutions that are very niche, have very niche applications, but also very large markets. And I think that, as companies and enterprises grow in their agentic agentic AI journey, I think they're going to go from kind of implementing more generic off-the-shelf solutions to more very case-specific solutions that are more complex and might take a little bit more to implement, but will have a higher ROI. So that's kind of what we're thinking and how we're investing in the space right now.
So you're thinking in terms of the business case we saw this morning with Jeffrey Raport from Harvard Business School, that these are real businesses. They're not just features, that if you find a layer application, as he called it, that really provides powerful capabilities to enterprises and then can automate some of this workflow either in a unique way or with some sort of data uniqueness, that's where you're looking to invest right now. And
that's
where
exactly
you see the
right.
value of agentic.
Yes.
Okay, great. So get your questions warmed up, because we'll try and keep the dialogue limited so that we have time for your questions and some interaction here. one thing that you mentioned, Barbara, was about shadow IT, and that name comes up a lot. And somebody even had another name for it. But the idea is that when you have technologies that are available to everybody, that's, in fact, I wrote about this a long time ago. The biggest thing to me about generative AI is it's a mediator between normal people and technologies they don't normally have access to. So normal people don't think of themselves as capable of writing a Python program, but all of a sudden they can write a Python program, as a simple example, by just telling one of these robots to write a Python program. And when these Python programs can become agentic and start to take other actions, they can go rogue pretty quickly in the worst of cases, but even in the best of cases, you have this explosion of activity, some of which may be great, but it's uncontrolled. And whether you're in a regulated industry or not, you generally have a little concern about that kind of stuff. So we call it shadow IT. I think this is very much like the original spreadsheet introduction, if there's anybody out there who remembers that, but I remember it. And spreadsheets were very similar, and the original may be shadow IT because people would literally go out and buy Apple computers to put on their desks so that they could run VisiCalc, which was the original spreadsheet, because it was so much better because they could not program the IBM mainframes to generate the financial reports that they were after. And so in a similar way here, but much more broadly, we suddenly have the ability for anybody with a computer or a phone even to tap into an enormous amount of very powerful resources. And so let me ask you to say a little bit more, if you've got more to say, Barbara, about how you think about this, particularly with regard to going from where we started with ChatGPT towards agentic workflows and things, and how you think about this issue of the shadow IT and what people might be thinking about or taking actions on to address it.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting, and like when speaking with different consulting company and also like what regulators are looking for, it's like even to your point, like when you use a spreadsheet that contains, let's say for example, formulas that you use to make business decision and that you use repeatedly, it needs to be registered, meaning there needs to be an inventory internally available, like, what are you doing with the data, like who's supporting that, who is owning, like, for example, the spreadsheet, like you need to have somebody from the business side who is accountable, somebody from the development side who is like, accountable for that, like, in case something goes wrong, like, who's basically owning that and who's being held accountable for that. Now, when we think about, I guess, like, Agentic AI or in general, Microsoft Power Apps, it should follow the same process, meaning like, what data are you going to be using? If you're using any models, like, who has got access to that? What are you doing with it? Like, what's the sensitivity of the data that all needs to be recorded for? Like, and you all need to have like, an inventory in place, and there needs to be like ownership and accountability with certification available. And I think like this is something that I think like I would say like most organization or financial organization, in particular in that space, like it needs to work through that to ensure like, that they have like, this inventory available, that there is proper training, education, governance, like, and from a risk perspective, everything that needs to be in place, like, is in place. And that's like a challenge in itself. Like, if you think about if you're using, how many people within your organization are using Excel spreadsheets that contains formulas, like, today. So it's like, it's a lot, for example, and with, Agentic AI, it will only like, increase, like, with, this process and like, with the governance, in place, like, that will increase the workload.
And Andy, with your clients, is this a topic of issue for them, for you right now?
Every single time. I think to Barbara's point, it starts with data protection, right? And that was, when we rolled out Copilot, that was, initially one of the things, hey, oh my gosh, all of a sudden everybody has access to all of this stuff, right, through the Copilots. Well, you already had the access, right? Now you have a tool that's going to find it a lot faster, right? And so you really do need to get your arms around that process of how are you securing and managing your data. On top of that, we talk a lot about just data exfiltration protection or DLP, sensitive labeling on those documents, and picking tools that respect those labels and will inherit those labels on any output that's given. So, for example, with Copilot Studio, if I'm trying to ingest documents that I don't have access to, it won't let me do that. If I have a document that's confidential and it's any output that it generates will also be tagged as confidential, and will be in any application that has to treat it as confidential. So it couldn't be printed or emailed, et cetera, whatever your policies are in the organization. So setting up those policies of how you're going to govern your data is absolutely the first step in the process. Now, the one thing I will say is, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Like, not everything has to be done across the entire enterprise before the first use case gets off the ground, right? Learn from that first use case. What did we do too much of? What did we do not enough of? So that as you go through subsequent libraries of data, use cases, et cetera, you're continuously learning as an enterprise.
That's a great point, because in fact, I think it was Brianna maybe this morning on the panel who said, or somebody said, you can't have governance slow down the process too much, right? So the governance, what I'm hearing is governance is crucial, but you can't let governance get in the way. And one of the reasons, I'm going to turn to you, Camille, for this, is that your employees have access to this stuff. So back to the shadow IT conversation, how would you feel if you is that a consideration in your choice of employment, and what you think about is how they view IT in these new tools? How much does that affect your perspective on an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, especially, when we are helping our companies or startups, get into these large enterprises, we know that that's something that's very much so on their mind. And so that's absolutely at the forefront. Something that I did kind of want to tailor off, putting my research hat on, what's kind of scary, especially kind of coming from the ethical side of things, is, now, as both mentioned, that people have so much access to their data, and it's actually can be very easy to put these things into models and expose information that should not be exposed. And so I think that we really need to be very forward thinking. There's a new area of research called actually machine unlearning. And that's the thought of, how do we take these models and actually unlearn specific data points that should have, never been learned, or are maybe due to GDPR need to be unlearned. But basically my point here is, it can be easy to make these models malicious and bad, and we as researchers or, people that are kind of on the forefront of innovation don't necessarily have the tools to undo these things right now or yet. And so, yeah, I think, we're also thinking about that as far as our investment strategy, but I also think enterprises just need to be very forward thinking, and, there's things that will come up that we haven't even really seen yet. So just putting out a word of caution there.
Right. So
I just want to, on that point, and that's another reason not to do everything before you start, right? Because that pace of change is so fast that the tools and the processes that you're going to use on that next, 5, 6, 7 use cases are going to be different, right? So learn from them, continue to look at what's the current curve, and adopt those best practices. Sorry.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask a wrap-up question here, and then we'll go to questions afterwards. So again, if you've got questions, get them ready. So what's the one thing, it's sort of an open-ended question, but what's the one thing, I'll start with you, Andy, this time, that you think the audience should know that they probably don't know? About the reality of agents.
Oh, I had a lot more other things I could have talked about. One thing, it's more of a mindset, just to embrace, is that AI and agents are just software. And when you think about deploying them, and you think about who should get them and why they're getting them, treat it like other software projects, right? Barbara and I were talking just before the break about how we roll out copilots, right? And where we've seen successes and failures, or not as successfuls among our enterprise customers. And the ones that said, hey, I've got a team here, and I understand how that team measures their success, and we're going to move the bar by investing in Copilot licenses for that team, and we're going to train them on how to use it, have done very, very well. We have other customers that have said, okay, we have 12,000 employees, we're going to give them all Copilot licenses and let it roll. And we've seen a lot of challenges with that, right? And hey, it looks great on our stock ticker for a couple of months, but then all of a sudden they're like, well, we don't need this, we're going to use some other tool instead, right? Because they didn't invest in that initial rollout. So treat, whether it's Copilot or GPT Enterprise, or pick your poison. Think about it just like you would with any other investment that you're making. Don't shortcut it just because it's AI and it's magic, because it's not magic, it's software.
Great insight. And Camille?
Yes. So I'm not sure what you all know, so I'm not going to claim that it's something that you all don't know. But something I think that should be more talked about is the compute cost. So and the compute, like the consequences of large-scale AI. So whether that's cost, like monetary, or energy and water consumption, all of these things. So as we're all very excited, and we're scaling, which is wonderful to see, especially again as someone who's spent a long time with people not thinking this was that cool. I think enterprises, and there just needs to be a lot more investment from enterprises, startups, VCs in the compute consequences of AI scaling. So.
Good point for us to keep in mind. Excellent. And Barbara?
I think from my perspective, it's not, I guess, like so much like what people don't know, but like I would be more interested to know like what does it mean for future workforce. So for example, if I, instead of managing people now, I'm managing agents now, how would that work? What skill sets are important? What does it mean for me? If something goes wrong, like who's being, what can I do? Like what do I need to know? What do I need to like retrain and upskill myself? Like what kind of skill sets are going to be important in the future to being able to manage that? And then also like, from an accountability perspective, like, who needs to be held accountable for what? And especially when we think about like, the younger generation entering into the workforce, like, with that bearing in mind, like, what do they need to know? What skill sets they need to have, and how the job market is changing in the future potentially, and like, how can we make people, people that are in the workforce already, or people that are going into the workforce, how can we help them to make ready for that?
Okay. Good thoughts all. So we have a couple of minutes left for questions. Do we have questions here? We have one right here. I think we have Joyce with the microphone.
Hi, Mike Kincaid from Widholm. First of all, thank you very much for a really interesting panel and your comments and the moderation. I'm really curious, going back to Jeffrey Raport's question. Your take on whether or not you think there is a packaged agentic AI application software business, meaning companies that are in the business, like Harvey, of selling packaged agentic AI software products. And even though one of the market trends we heard about this morning was there's more buy versus build, which is the classic case in the software industry for any new functional area application. Always happens that way. Will it happen this time? And I'm asking because if you start with the problem first, and there's a lot of customization, and the technology is growing in capability exponentially, doubling every 6 months, does that mean that an app software business is going to be really difficult versus, maintaining it in-house, building it in-house, you're aware of your problems, how things are changing, and so forth?
So I apologize, I arrived a little bit late today, so I might have missed that topic, but is the question more about a pure play agent business or a software business that is also investing in developing agents that will be part of their enterprise they're selling to?
Pure play agentic AI software business.
Anyone have any thoughts before I jump in?
Well, I'm the moderator, but I have lots of thoughts.
Yeah. I think that I've worked with companies that are building products to help their customers build agents. But all of the agent strategy that I've seen, aside from that, has really been, hey, I'm selling this product, Microsoft Word, and I'm building an agent on top of it, right? ServiceNow, Epic, pick any of those line of business ERP applications. They're building agents on top of it, and the ability to use agentic workflows on top of their products. So I think that would be the differentiation I would make.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question, and in the old Yogi Berra way, the prediction is hard, especially about the future. But I do think this is different in the sense that I think of it more like the spreadsheet, as I was saying before. So I think it's both. In other words, the spreadsheet's an enormous platform, and as Barbara was saying, most corporations have a bazillion, that's a technical term, a bazillion spreadsheets that are customized by individuals. They're not sold by any software firm or anything like that. There are also a million software products that handle spreadsheets, that use spreadsheets as the platform for the basis for their capabilities and things like that. So I think there'll be both. I think there'll be agentic platforms that people will build on top of. And I think, like spreadsheets, since these are so accessible to individuals, they'll also be used by individuals to create very unique products for their workflows. In fact, again, you can see movement in this direction with the kind of butler that OpenAI came out with that says, okay, I'm going to watch what email you read and everything every day. I'll create a customized schedule for you. So you can literally think of somebody sort of watching you if you're comfortable with that, and that's a whole other set of issues. But it can learn you and then start to create agents for you that are unique to you. Those aren't going to be software products, but they might be built on software platforms that are agentic in basis. So I think that's the way it will go.
That's kind of where I was going with, like, the framework side of things.
Yeah. We're technically out of time. I'm getting the big hook here. If there's a question or two people have and you want to stay, we'll take one or two more. But otherwise, please feel free to get on to the next session.